Cross Currents by Robert Becker. The Perils of Electropollution, the Promise of Electromedicine. Part 1, Life Energy, the Hidden Dynamic in Medicine. Chapter 1, The History of Life Energy in Medicine. Since the days of revelation, in fact, the same four corrupting errors have been made over and over again. Submission to faulty and unworthy authority, submission to what is customary to believe, submission to the prejudice of the mob, and worst of all, concealment of ignorance by a false show of unheld knowledge for no better reason than pride. Roger Bacon. Martha's story. We sat in a quiet corner of the lab, the best I could do on a short notice. She had called a few minutes before, asking to see me as soon as possible. Because of the ring of urgency in her voice, I suggested that she come right over. She said, I want you to know that I'm 22 years old and capable of making up my own mind. Dr. X at the medical center tells me that I have leukemia, and that's hard to treat, and that the only chance I have is to take one of the new experimental drugs. It might work, but all my hair will fall out and it will make me very sick, Dr. Becker. I want to know what you would do if you were me. I had to think this over, so instead of answering right away, I asked her enough questions to make sure that the diagnosis had been well established. She described the complete workup that she had gone through and produced a copy of her last bone marrow report. She said that she hated the bone marrow biopsies in particular because they were so painful. She went on to say that she had watched her mother die in horrible discomfort from chemotherapy from abdominal cancer, and that she felt that the treatment had not only been useless, but had destroyed her mother's last days. I will not take the same kind of treatment, she said emphatically. I've come to you because I've heard that you're different and can help me find some other treatment. I assured her that I certainly agreed with her opinion about her mother's case, but I don't see what I can do in your case. I told her, you seem to have already made your mind up not to accept the recommended treatment. What do you expect me to be able to do? She had spirit and she got mad. I came to you because I thought you could advise me on what to do myself or could send me to somebody who'd give me some other treatment. But you're just like all the rest. I guess a waste of my time. She got up to leave, but I motioned her to sit back down. I told her that a few months before I had been at a meeting in another city and had met a well-qualified physician who had the courage to treat cancer patients through diet visualization and the biofeedback techniques with some very interesting results. I agree with your decision, I said, and I can send you to this doctor. However, I can make no promises and I can't assure you that it will work. But to be honest, that's what I would do. She agreed to try it, and I made the phone call. She left promising to keep in touch. I received a postcard about a month later, having a wonderful time, wish you were here. Then I heard nothing more from her for almost a year, and when she walked into my lab and announced, I'm cured. She described the treatment she had undergone and how she progressed until her last 3 bone marrow determinations were absolutely normal. She had waited until both she and the doctor were sure of the result before coming to see me. She then said, I have to tell you something else. I just came from Dr. X's office. I told him what I had done and that I was cured, and even offered to let him do another bone marrow to see for himself. He said, get the hell out of here, and he refused to even talk with me. She sent me one more postcard about 2 years later. It read, simply, still okay, thanks. Jerry's story. Most of my unofficial patients were employees at the hospital or members of their families who would come to me with apologies for taking up my time. One day, one of the electricians was working on the wiring in the lab while I was eating my lunch. Say, Doc, my son has been having some trouble lately, suddenly said. He seems to lose his balance sometimes. That what could cause that? A few questions established that the boy, who was only 7 years old, complained of dizziness, headaches, and some of the problems with seeing, and that all of this was rapidly getting worse. The family doctor thought it might be an ear infection and had treated the child for this, but there had been no improvement. The possibility of a brain tumor occurred to me immediately. I had said, listen, this could be something pretty serious. It might even be something in this brain. I think you should take him to a good neurologist or neurosurgeon as soon as possible. A few days later, the electrician came into the lab and said, Doc, you were right. We took Jerry to Dr. Y at the medical center, who ordered some tests and told us it might be a brain tumor. I called the doctor's office and found that a CAT scan had shown a mass in the back of the brain and that exploratory surgery was scheduled for the next day. I told the father that I thought everything possible was being done and that most of these tumors turned out to be benign. The next afternoon, the father came in with a broad grin, saying, You were right again. Dr. Y said the tumor looked benign. He took out almost all of it, and he thinks Jerry will be okay. I said that was good news indeed. However, I still felt somewhat uneasy about this case. I told the father, Be sure and let me know what the pathologist says it is. 4 days later, he came back saying that the pathologist also reported a benign tumor. I breathed a sigh of relief and told the father that I was pleased as he was. Jerry remained in the hospital recovering, and all seemed well. One day, a week or so later, I arrived at work to find an electrician waiting for me at the lab door. Last night, my wife was in the hospital bringing Jerry his clothes because he was supposed to come home from this morning. He began obviously upset. One of the interns walked in and told her that Jerry had cancer of the brain and that they had to start x-ray treatment this morning. His eyes blurred with tears. Doc, why in the hell didn't they tell us that before? My wife got all upset and someone else had to call me at home to tell me to come in. We don't know what to do. I've seen brain cancer patients after x-ray treatment and I don't want Jerry to go through that. When we said we wanted to think it over, they sent us to social services where they told us that if we don't sign the permission, they'll take Jerry away from us. I assured him that he did not have the sign to permit and that I wanted to see both him and his wife talk it over. I called a friend in the pathology department at medical center. He gave me the diagnosis and said that the staff had sent the slides out for review to the Armed Forces Institutes of Pathology, where experts had unanimously diagnosed the tumor as malignant. My friend could not explain how the diagnosis had been missed at the medical center. I then called a friend and neurosurgeon at the Mayo Clinic and explained the situation to him. He said that there was nothing that could be done for this kind of tumor. The x-ray treatment would slow its growth for a while, but at the price of nausea, pain, and discomfort. There was no chemotherapy and that would do any good, and so none should be given. The boy was going to die. If Jerry were his son, he would simply make him comfortable and help him to enjoy his few remaining months. I asked him for his opinion on such alternative treatments as diet and visualization. He said he thought these were nonsense, but he agreed that such treatments would do no harm. His main objection was that they might give the parents false hope, making it harder for them to accept the inevitable. When I talked to the electrician and his wife, I told him what this neurosurgeon had said. I told them that the authority to refuse any treatment and that if this was their choice, I would help them. I then described the alternative treatments, saying they're not approved, but they do no harm and sometimes they work. If Jerry were my son, that's what I would do. If you'd like, I can contact some doctors you could go to. The father was willing, but his wife totally rejected the idea, so I did not pursue it further. They signed the permission papers for x-ray treatment, and the father kept me posted on little Jerry. The boy finished the x-ray treatment and finally got over the nausea, but had lost a lot of weight and was quite weak. A few weeks later, he began having headaches again, and the CAT scan showed that the tumor was growing. The doctors recommended chemotherapy with an experimental drug that they said might work. Jerry would have to go to a hospital more than 100 miles away, but this was, the doctor said, his last chance. Jerry and his mother made the trip, and the father visited on the weekends. Every Monday, the father would report his son's progress to me. The chemotherapy was very bad, and Jerry was very sick. His hair had fallen out. He had lost more weight. He couldn't eat and had to be fed intravenously. He screamed every time his chemotherapy was given. The electrician said, "Doc, it tears my heart out. It tears my heart out. All he asked for is to have them stop sticking him with needles and giving him the medicine that makes him so sick so he can go home. All I could do for the father was sympathize with him." Then one Sunday, I received a phone call from him. "We just brought Jerry home. Can we come over and see you?" They arrived with Jerry propped up on pillows in the back seat of the car. He was a very sick little boy, not much more than skin and bones. He was breathing with difficulty and was unable to move because of his pain. His parents and I moved away from the car a little, and his mother said, "I would watch the nurses give him the chemo every day, and I just assumed they were doing it right. Yesterday, they were left with the empty bottle on the bedside table, and I looked at it. I found that all along they had been giving him twice the dose he was supposed to get. I asked to see the doctor right away, and when he came in, I told him what I had found. At first, he said the dose was double because Jerry had such bad cancer. Finally, he admitted it had been a mistake. But he said, "It doesn't make any difference. The boy is going to die anyway." The mother immediately signed Jerry out of the hospital against medical advice and brought him home. She said, "I don't know. Maybe you were right and we should have taken your suggestion. I guess there's nothing you can do for him now." I agreed that nothing could be done now, explaining that Jerry's immune system and other defenses had been destroyed by the X-ray treatments and chemotherapy. I made sure that the doctors had given them some effective narcotics for the pain, and we went back to the car. Very gently, I shook Jerry's hand, not saying anything. He looked up at me. He knew. 2 weeks later, Jerry died. These two case reports are actually combinations of my experiences with different individuals. However, I have encountered all singular events described at one time or another in my 30 years of practice. The two stories above illustrate the division of present-day medicine into seemingly incompatible philosophies: orthodox medicine and energy medicine. The proponents of orthodox medicine, the kind taught in medical school and promoted by the American Medical Association and the Food and Drug Administration, are absolutely convinced that the body is simply a machine that cannot heal itself, and that the only appropriate therapies are powerful drugs and mechanical technologies. Proponents of energy medicine, on the other hand, believe that the body is more than a machine, and that it is capable not only of healing itself, but also performing other actions that lie completely outside the realm of established science. The later practitioners believe that an appropriate therapy is one that either encourages the body's own energetic systems or that adds external energy to these systems. Energy medicine is actually a generic term, one that is used to refer to many ancient and some modern medical practices. It is derived from the concept of alternative or holistic medicine, which encompasses many different therapeutic disciplines, but which views each as separate entity with different mechanisms of action. The idea of energy medicine that postulates a common basis for all these disciplines has arisen lately because of new discoveries in biology that cast serious doubt on strictly mechanistic concepts of life and seem to reintroduce the old idea of body energy. These discoveries are not vitalistic in the sense that they are proved or even hint at some mysterious, unknowable life force. Rather, they reveal the presence of electrical and magnetic forces at the most basic levels within living organisms. These discoveries, which are the basis for a new scientific revolution, are rapidly changing what we believe about the way living things work. The practitioners of each discipline of alternative medicine, for example, acupuncturists, homeopaths, and electrotherapy practitioners, eagerly and often prematurely embrace this latest scientific revolution as their own, postulating that these energetic systems were the ones assessed by their particular techniques and the other alternative medicines lack this ability. However, more recently, the idea has arisen that this one common principle could be applied to alternative medical techniques. As a result, the generic term energy medicine was coined. While this scientific revolution was brewing, a revolution in medical practice was also occurring. Patients were becoming increasingly dissatisfied with orthodox medicine. The promises of technology implied by such ideas as the war on cancer were unfilled. That war seemed, in fact, to have turned into one of attrition, with the patients suffering the casualties and bearing the increasing expenses. Hospitals were becoming dangerous places to enter. Patients sometimes entered with minor illnesses and left with permanent disabilities resulting from one complication after another. The old adage, the doctor knows best, began to be replaced with the doctor is usually wrong, or worse, your doctor can make you sicker than you already are. Some patients discovered the various disciplines of energy medicine, which appeared to have three outstanding things to offer. First, they would do no harm. Second, they often seemed to do some good. And third, they were much less expensive than orthodox medicine. As a result, number of patients treated with these unorthodox, unapproved techniques has increased markedly over the past decade. In sum, the revolution in biology and medicine has been brought about in part by consumer dissatisfaction with orthodox medicine. With its increasingly impersonal technological sophistication, its high cost, and its inefficiency, and in part by the new scientific data challenging the mechanistic view of life. There are many questions raised by this revolution. Is energy medicine scientifically real, or is it simply the newest quackery? Which of the numerous techniques, if any, holds the key to its application? Are there really bodily energies that play a role in healing? And most importantly, will energy medicine survive to dominate orthodox medicine or to become integrated with it? Or will it simply disappear like so many fads of the past? Before we even attempt to bring some order to the present disorder, we have to know more about energy medicine itself, its roots and basic concepts. In this chapter, we will return to the beginnings of science and medicine, to a time when they were one. We shall see how the path to the present was not a straight road of gradual enlightenment, but a road with many wrong turns. Many new ideas emerged and flourished only to become dogma themselves, used as a defense against more new ideas. In retrospect, we can see a great cycle has occurred in which we have finally returned to some concepts that formed the very beginnings of science and medicine. The origins of energy medicine. Medical philosophy reflects the prevailing view of society toward basic philosophical questions. What is life? Who am I? What is the relation of living things to the non-living world? We now tend to look back with condescending amusement at the medicine man shaking his rattle, thinking that we are superior because we are the beneficiaries of great advancements in scientific knowledge and technology. But are we really so much better off? The present evolutionary philosophy holds that we are simply statistical accidents based upon the coming together of the right chemicals under the right conditions. By this way of thinking, random chance evolution has resulted in the human being, and we are no more than our antecedents were, chemical machines. If we are mere machines, then so are our doctors, and modern medicine is simply the repair of machines by other machines. And I am not so sure that this scenario is superior to that of the medicine man shaking his rattle. It is certainly true that we have passed through a series of stages in the disease patterns that beset humanity. While we were almost totally at the mercy of epidemics of infectious diseases in the past, we now have public health measures and medications that have almost completely eliminated those diseases. However, we seem to have merely traded one set of problems for another. We may now live longer, but we are unhappy with our quality of life. We are, to a growing extent, experiencing other problems during our lifetimes. The incidence of cancer, degenerative diseases, and birth defects is rising. New diseases such as AIDS have appeared. We seem to be almost on the brink of disaster, with rapidly increasing numbers of sick people, and an overused medical care system that appears unable to cure, care, or cope. Important questions are being raised that threaten the fabric of dogma that the life sciences have been weaving since the scientific revolution of the Renaissance. This fabric, which once seemed of the whole cloth and seamless, has been shown to be incomplete, containing many misdirected stitches and prone to erroneous interpretations. Primitive medicine. Long before written history, our ancestors lived in a world full of mysterious forces that governed their lives. The cycles of the sun and the seasons, lightning and fire, wind, drought, and storm. Their own bodies were equally full of unknown energies and potentials, life and death, sickness and healing, birth and aging. Humanity, blessed or cursed, with a questioning intelligence, has an overwhelming curiosity and a need to explain its place in the scheme of things. The body of beliefs that arose out of this quest was at first one single system encompassing that we now call religion, philosophy, and medicine. Peoples widely scattered across the globe shared many common aspects of this early belief system. Primarily, they believed in two realities: the world they saw around them and the unseen spirit world in which dwelled the forces that energized the world of nature and people. Life was part of the spider web of the universe, with everything interlocked and interrelated by spirit or energy. The earth was the mother and that sustained life, and that all existed and had been created by some supreme being. All life was endowed with a special energy, a life force that vitalized it. This life energy was one of the great universal forces of the second reality. Disease was the result of the other lead world forces acting upon the patient, and death was the transfer of life energy out of the body into the spirit world. Floods, earthquakes, droughts, famines, disease, death, and birth were seen as the results of deliberate actions by the spirits, who were either displeased with or approving of the actions of humanity. People were at the mercy not only of the natural forces of this environment, but also the mysterious world of this other reality. Often the life force was believed to have a dualistic nature and could become imbalanced under the influence of external forces, resulting in disease. These internal and external energies together made up the separate reality with which the shaman healer established contact during an altered state of consciousness, reached through dreams, severe physical or mental stress, meditation, spirit quest, or the use of mind altering substances. Once the healer had connected with this other reality, he would be able to diagnose and treat his patient by influence either the external forces of the spirit world or the internal forces within the equally mysterious body of the patient. The cure was produced by balancing the dualistic forces within the patient, transferring the patient forces from the spirit world, or giving the patient the healer's own life force. These basic concepts expanded as societies evolved and people had time to examine their environments in more detail. In the process, specific forces were discovered in nature that, while equally mysterious as those gods and spirits, were controllable by the shaman healer, because all living things possessed this life force or spirit. Even insignificant appearing herbs could have effects on the human body via their own spirit properties. Over the millennia, this idea resulted in a primitive but extensive pharmacopoeia. It seems reasonable to speculate that the mobility possessed by animals and humans was considered a special manifestation of life force. The discovery of lodestone, a natural magnet composed of the natural magnetic material magnetite, is lost in prehistory. When lodestones were found to be able to move by themselves, they were believed to have a particularly potent life force, and this mystical power was thought to be able to influence the human life force. Static electricity, which also produced a moving force and is easily produced by rubbing natural amber with fur, must have seemed as mystical as lodestone. These discoveries, made long before written history in many societies, were among the most significant events in prehistoric times. They represented the beginnings of the exploration of the environment and the dawn of science. Knowledge of the action of herbs ultimately led to chemistry, and the lodestone and static electricity were the basis for the development of modern physics. These discoveries were the keys to the beginning of the science of medicine and the science of life. The first medical textbooks. Certainly, by the advent of written history, medicine had already evolved into a complex belief system centering on life force and body energies. Treatments for influencing these energies involved magic herbs, the natural forces of magnetism, and electricity. By all criteria, The system of medicine we call primitive was not only well developed and sophisticated, but it was actually a kind of energy medicine. It left behind a legacy of concepts and techniques based on a belief in the existence of a life force that could be influenced in a number of fashions. These concepts and techniques were incorporated into the first written medical text. To date, the oldest known medical document is the Chinese Yellow Emperor's Book of Internal Medicine, attributed to Hang Ti and thought to have been written sometime around 2000 BC. And that's spelled Houang-Ti. Sorry if I mispronounced it. It presents the concept of a bodily energy called qi, which worked through the balance of two other opposing forces in the body, yang and yin. Disease was thought to be produced when these forces became unbalanced, and two specific techniques for restoring balance, acupuncture and moxibustion, were described. Acupuncture consisted of the insertion of very fine needles into specific energy points on well-defined lines or meridians of energy flow on the surface of the body. Included with acupuncture was the practice of placing lodestone over the same energy points, although this was apparently considered less effective than needle insertion. The other techniques, moxibustion, consisted of burning small amounts of moxa, small tuft or soft combustible material, either over the same points used in acupuncture or over the areas of painful irritation. Both techniques were viewed as influencing an internal energy system by introducing external energy. This external energy was electrical via the insertion of metallic needles, magnetic using the lodestone or heat and moxibustion technique. The origin of these treatments and their basic concepts must have antedated the Yellow Emperor's text at least several thousand years, attesting to the sophistication of thought among pre-literate peoples. An Egyptian document, the Kahun papyrus, dates back to approximately 2000 BC. It relates to the use of specific herbal remedies, along with prayers for intercession by the gods. While the Kahun papyrus does not specifically say so, it is known that the Egyptians also used the properties of the lodestone in therapy. In fact, it's widely claimed that Cleopatra wore a lodestone on her forehead to prevent aging. The Vedas, the ancient religious scriptures of the Hindus, also date back to about 2000 BC. These dealt with the treatment of many diseases using Siktavati or Ashmana, which can be translated as instruments of stone, and may refer to the use of lodestones in therapy. Finally, it is well known that Tibetan monks used bar magnets in highly specific fashion to influence the minds of novice monks during their training. It would seem reasonable to conclude that this practice was based on much older technique involving the use of lodestones. Certainly, by the beginning of written history, several Eastern civilizations were practicing a kind of energy medicine in which the forces of electricity and magnetism were employed by physicians to influence internal energy systems of the body. Medicine in Greece, the beginnings of Western medicine. Western medicine is usually believed to have begun around 500 BC in ancient Greece, with the writings of Hippocrates. However, even in those days, technology transfer occurred, and the medical concepts of Chinese, Indo-Tibetan, and Mediterranean peoples had already found their way into Greek culture. Some 150 years before Hippocrates, Thales of Miletus, often considered the father of European philosophy, laid the groundwork for modern physics and biology. He discovered the lodestone and static electricity from amber, called in Greek electron. He proposed that living things were animated by a vital spirit, that this spirit was shared by the lodestone and by amber. Thales said, the magnet has soul because it attracts iron, and all things are full of gods. In fact, these concepts were common to the ancient world and were probably learned by Thales during his study in Egypt. However, his most important contribution was a philosophical idea that we're actual causes for all things, and that human beings could discover these causes through the application of reason, logic, and observation. This important concept can be illustrated by the difference between the necromancer's dissection of an animal to determine the intention of gods and the philosopher's dissection of an animal to discover its anatomy to learn how it worked. Thales of Maltus made the first step away from the mythology toward the feeble beginnings of science. Hippocrates incorporated many of Thales' ideas into his philosophy of medicine, but his contributions were far more than a simple codification of pre-existing ideas. Hippocrates left the indelible stamp upon further development of medicine with his prolific writings. While the Hippocratic Oath is now being replaced by something less archaic, I was proud to take it when I graduated from medical school in 1948. In many ways, Hippocrates can be considered to have been the ideal physician. I'm certain that even today he would be the type of physician we would all want as our family doctor. He was not arrogant or certain in his beliefs. All of the quotations attributed to him I like following the best. Life is short, and the art long, the occasion fleeting, experience fallacious, and judgment difficult. Art in this quotation refers to medicine. If only the modern physician, often so sure that he is right, would adopt some of Hippocrates' humility. Hippocrates also realized that disease was not a single causal relationship between an external agent and a simple machine, but rather that each disease is a complex product of the agent and the body's reaction to it. Disease is not an entity, but a fluctuating condition of the patient's body, a battle between the substance of the disease and the natural self-healing tendency of the body. Regrettably, these words of wisdom have been largely forgotten by modern medicine. While we believe that a vital spirit was responsible for life, Hippocrates thought it acted through four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Disease was thought to be produced by an imbalance of these humors, a concept very similar to the Chinese qi, or life force, which acts through the balance of yang and yin. His treatments for disease included the use of many natural herbs whose properties were known through pre-existing medical knowledge. In a less well understood passage, Hippocrates said, "Those ideas that medicines do not cure, iron cures. Those which iron cannot cure, fire cures. And those which fire cannot cure are to be reckoned wholly incurable." Clearly, Hippocrates tried herbal remedies first. If it didn't work, he resorted to iron and then to fire. Iron is generally translated as scalpel, but fire has not been satisfactorily translated because the natural lodestone was to attract natural iron and convey its magnetic properties to it. Perhaps Hippocrates adopted the ancient use of magnets in therapy. In that event, fire is translatable as the equally ancient techniques of moxibustion. Given this history, the old common thread of vital spirit expressing itself through balanced energy flow and alterable by the application of these natural forces becomes plainly evident in Hippocrates' writings. One of Hippocrates' achievements was the idea of the medical school, wherein prospective physicians could learn their art and craft. He found many such schools or Asclepiae throughout the eastern Mediterranean. 200 years after Hippocrates' death, the Aesculapian at Alexandria, Egypt, produced a remarkable physician and scientist, Erasistratus, who was probably the first man to scientifically dissect the human body. He discarded Hippocrates' theory of humor and linked disease with the abnormalities of internal organs he found by dissection. Erasistratus properly identified motor and sensory nerves and traced them into the brain, which he believed was the seat of the mind and soul rather than the heart, and Hippocrates was proposed. He also described the function of the heart as a pump for the blood. While he described the mechanics of the body, he was a vitalist who believed that life force was a subtle vapor he called pneuma. In many ways, Erostratus was far ahead of his time. His ideas were essentially correct, gained acceptance. Medical and biological knowledge would have progressed far more rapidly than it did. Unfortunately, his observations and ideas persisted only a few hundred years and were then totally swept away by a graduate from medical school at Pergamon. That graduate's name, Galen, is well known even now. Galen was, in most respects, the antithesis of Hippocrates. He was absolutely sure of himself and his beliefs, arrogant, self-serving, and prone to falsehood if it served his purpose. Wise enough not to direct challenge the great Hippocrates, Galen endorsed the concept of four humors, but added much additional material derived from his own observations and experiments. Most importantly, he proposed the attractive idea that for every disease there was a single cause and single cure, which was eagerly adopted by physicians who, then as now, sought authoritarian infallibility. Galen was a prolific writer, and during his lifetime he published a complete system of medicine, addressing anatomy, physiology, and therapeutics. This became the standard text and ultimately the overwhelming dogma that dominated medicine for the next 1500 years. Unfortunately, Galen was wrong. His ideas about anatomy were incorrect. His teachings on physiology were based upon falsified experiments. In his day, his concepts were challenged by those physicians who were followers of Erostratus. Galen responded with what can only be called a deliberate campaign of falsehoods and vilification. He repeated the experiments of Erostratus and found them to be incorrect. Actually, the opposite was true. Erostratus was a careful experimenter and observer. However, Galen's dubious scientific integrity was never called into account, and no one bothered to repeat his experiments. While practically all the writings of Erostratus were destroyed, Galen's writings have been well preserved. Galen succeeded by providing a comprehensive system of medicine mixed with pseudoscience that provided definite answers for both diseases and treatments. Though largely wrong, it carried a stamp of authority and effectively put a stop to any valid experimentation or questioning for the next 1500 years. Early attempts at logical observation by Erostratus and the humanism of Hippocrates were both submerged by the false dogma of Galen. The first wrong turn had been taken. Western civilization entered what historians have, for good reason, called the Dark Ages, in which medicine and science were totally authoritarian and included erroneous concepts of how the body worked. The Renaissance, the beginnings of scientific medicine. The emergence of Western civilization from the Dark Ages was primarily the result of one factor, the challenge to authority. In medicine and science, the first challenger was a man who was a strange mix of humanism, mysticism, early scientific logic, and a most abrasive personality. Paracelsus was the source of the legend of Dr. Faustus, who sold his soul to the devil in exchange for knowledge. Paracelsus had no respect for authority in any form. At the age of 14, he left home to wander across Europe and Asia, studying at many universities and possibly never graduating from any. His attitude toward organized learning is best illustrated by his statement that universities do not teach all things, so as a doctor, must seek out old wives, gypsies, sorcerers, wandering tribes, old robbers, and such outlaws that take lessons from them. Knowledge is experience. Pericles detested Galen on an obsolete fraud, Once he burned Gallen's book in front of the university before a cheering throng of medical students. He stressed the fact that a body can heal itself, while the most that Gallen's medicine could do was to delay healing or produce disastrous complications. Paracelsus foreshadowed the discoveries of modern antibiotics by correctly showing that mercury could cure syphilis. He accurately described the cause of thyroid goiter, and he provided the basis for homeopathy by claiming that diseases could be cured by minute doses of similars, chemicals that produce the same symptoms. In the first environmental medicine study, Paracelsus correctly ascribed silicosis in miners to inhalation of materials from the mine rather than to punishment by mountain spirits. His experiments with herbal remedies and alchemy set the stage for future growth of chemistry, and he made extensive use of the lodestone in his treatments. This remarkable man even brushed aside the attacks of organized medicine and science. His fame was great, and his lectures, to which all citizens were invited, were filled to overflowing. His writings were remarkably influential, particularly his major work, the Great Surgery Book. Yet he remained practically penniless throughout his lifetime. Many of Paracelsus' beliefs and ideas appear mystical and to some present-day reviewers downright crazy. Still, there is no escaping the fact that many were actually profound insights into the nature of disease and physiology that had no precedence at that time. From what secret sources did he derive these creative insights and remarkable concepts? Was Paracelsus a natural extrasensory perceptionist who, operating by intuition alone, could make remarkable quantum leaps in understanding? One of his most startling statements was this: "To think is to act on a plane of thought, and if the thought is intense enough, it may produce an effect on the physical plane. It is very fortunate that few persons possess the power to make it act on a physical plane, because there are few persons who never have any evil thoughts." Evidently, Paracelsus believed that thoughts had a physical reality and could, if intense enough, produce an action on the physical plane. These concepts obviously relate to the present-day ideas of extrasensory perception, psychokinesis, and parapsychology. While never explicitly stating so, this passage may also be interpreted to mean that Paracelsus also recognized the power of thought or conviction to heal. Paracelsus was a vitalist who believed intensely in life force he termed archaeus, which could be influenced by the mysterious action of the magnet. He managed to combine this mysticism with a remarkable insight into future biological knowledge. He said, "The power to see does not come from the eye, the power to hear does not come from the ear, nor the power to feel from the nerves, but it is the spirit of man that sees through the eye, hears with the ear, and feels by means of the nerves. Wisdom and reason and thought are not contained in the brain, but belong to the invisible and universal spirit, which feels through the heart and thinks by means of the brain." The relationship of this concept to the modern concept of the duality of mind and brain is obvious. Going even further, Paracelsus viewed the body as a whole organism composed of many parts. Each part interacted with the others and was inseparable from the whole, which was greater than the sum of the parts. Quote, "Even the ignorant knows that the man has a heart and lungs and a brain and a liver, stomach, but he thinks that each of these organs are separate and independent things that have nothing to do with each other." End quote. Several centuries before the rise of reductionism, Paracelsus saw to defect in reductionist philosophy and placed its future proponents among the ignorant. Paracelsus built his system of medicine on the legacy of life force, herbalism, and the therapeutic application of natural forces, which can be tracked back to through the Greeks to prehistoric man. Like Aristotle, he trusted logical observation and experimentation. Unlike Aristotle, he succeeded in influencing the course of history. His legacy, derived from a visionary power, gave rise to all that we now call science. In a remarkably prescient statement, Paracelsus wrote that the human body is vapor materialized by sunshine mixed with the life of the stars. Today, physicists believe that the elements of the human body were originally generated in supernovas, the great thermonuclear explosions of stars. Paracelsus died under mysterious circumstances at age 48, leaving his few possessions to the poor and his remaining manuscripts to a single barber surgeon. The scientific revolution underway. 2 years after Paracelsus' death, Andreas Vesalius, a military surgeon, published the first really accurate anatomical text, De Humani Corporis Fabrica, the fabric of the human body. This work finally and completely dispelled the dogma of Galen's infallibility. The age of science and reason had begun. People began to learn about the science of living things, biology, and the science of non-living things, physics. The mysterious natural forces of electricity and magnetism gradually began to be understood. A few great scientists contributed the basic concepts and provided the foundation upon which the rest of science built its edifices. The first of these was William Gilbert, physician to Queen Elizabeth I, and first true scientist whose interest lay not only in medicine, but also in the forces of electricity and magnetism. His publication in 1600 of De Magnete, the magnet, clearly delineated electricity and magnetism as separate forces, established rules of action for each force, and described the earth as a large magnet. No other was it believed that the compass needle points due north because of mysterious rays from the North Star. Gilbert's most important contribution was in the tradition of Hippocrates, Aristotle, and Paracelsus, a plea for trustworthy experiments and demonstrated arguments to replace the probable guesses and opinions of the ordinary professors of philosophy. This plea was later expanded and codified by Francis Bacon in the scientific method. During the 1600s, several means of storing electrical fluid were discovered, and better methods of generating static electricity were devised. However, knowledge of electricity was limited to static electricity, the same type as that produced by rubbing amber with fur or walking across a rug. Knowledge of how living things actually works also advanced at its time, particularly with the discovery that nerves transmit sensory information and cause muscle contraction. The brain became firmly identified as the seat of thinking and memory. With this knowledge came increasingly controversy between the mechanists, who viewed living organisms as complex machines that are completely understandable by means of physical principles, and the vitalists, who believe in the mysterious unknown life force. However, even among the mechanists, there was apparent reluctance to completely exclude the mystery. René Descartes, the main proponent of the mechanistic model, still postulated a soul, which he conveniently located in the pineal gland, a curious pine cone-shaped structure located in the center of the head. Mesmer, under the influence of Paracelsus' teachings, proposed that living things generated universal forces that they could transmit to others through animal magnetism. He began treating a variety of ills using magnetic therapy. Because he was remarkably successful, he incurred the wrath of the medical establishment. Orthodox physicians claimed that he was practicing magic. In 1784, King Louis the 16th was forced to appoint a commission to investigate him. The commission's report was unfavorable, ascribing Mesmer's successful results to simple suggestion. The only remaining legacy of his work is termed mesmerism, a synonym for hypnosis. Hahnemann, building on Paracelsus' law of similars, constructed a complex system of medicine known as homeopathy. The system was based upon the administration of minute doses of the essences of substances that produced symptoms similar to those from which the patient was suffering. Hahnemann postulated these essences reacted with the energetic vital spirit of the body in a manner similar to that of lodestone, a treatment method he also advocated. Throughout this period of scientific excitement, the argument between the mechanist and the vitalist heated up, and the vitalist eagerly embracing electricity as the scientific life force. In doing so, however, they were putting all their eggs in one basket, where if electricity were ever totally excluded from life processes, they would have lost the battle. In the late 1700s, another remarkable physician, Luigi Galvani, stepped into the controversy. While he was thoroughly humanistic physician in the Hippocratic tradition, Galvani was caught up in the fervor of the scientific experimentation of the time. He established his own laboratory, complete with his latest instruments for generating sparks of static electricity by friction. He was searching for proof of the electrical nature of life force, and he believed that he had found it when he observed muscles contracting when they were connected to the spinal cord with the metallic wires. Galvani termed this animal electricity, and he postulated that this electricity was produced by a living body itself. For some reason, he brushed aside the fact that this effect could be produced when two wires composed of different metals were used. Alessandro Volta, a physicist and colleague of Galvani's, at first supported Galvani's observations. However, he then discovered that electricity was actually produced by the junction between the two similar metals, and that it was quite different from the single spark of static electricity. What Galvani had actually found was direct current or continuously flowing electricity, a discovery that was shaped the world ever since. Volta's pile of dissimilar metals was the beginning of storage battery and the possibility of continuous generation of large amounts of electricity. Galvani never publicly responded to Volta's critique. This was unfortunate because he had shown animal electricity. Flowing from the injured tissue, muscle contraction could be caused without the use of wires, simply by bringing the muscle into contact with the cut end of the spinal cord itself. This later became known as the current of injury, which is the electrical current found in any injured tissue. But by that time, Galvani had been so discredited that the idea of current of injury was relegated to the status of unimportant curiosity. Galvani, like Paracelsus, was far ahead of his time. He observed and reported the transmission of electrical forces across space when a spark produced by this electrostatic machine caused the contraction of a muscle held with the metallic forceps by an assistant across the room. This important principle remained undiscovered until Hertz's experiments 100 years later. Galvani searched for variations in atmospheric electricity antenna wires. Had he defended himself more vigorously against Volta's attacks and continued his observations, the past of science might have been very different.